It's COVID times, and people have been really wanting to come out and visit conferences.
Yeah.
And we've had a live conference after a long time. And we are absolutely delighted and thrilled to have Jeff, who has joined us for this session at the podcast
Okay.
studio. So, Jeff, please make a introduction about yourself and tell the world how excited we are to be here.
Well, I'm Jeff Bullas, the founder of jeffbullas.com, which I started as a social media blog back in 2009 when blogs were hot and social media was just turning up on the scene. So I was fascinated by social media back then. I was going out with a lady at the time. She was on Facebook. She said, "Get on Facebook." And I went, "Okay." So I got on Facebook and I signed in and joined up. And then I saw all my colleagues from college when I was doing my teaching degree sort of show up in my feed. And I went, "Wow." And then I saw people's obsession with social media back then. And that was in 2008. So I said, "There's something going on." So I read a blog by HubSpot which said, "If you've got an inkling of what you want to do in business, start a blog." I also read Tim Ferriss's book, The 4 Hour Work Week.
Yep.
And what I discovered, I went, "Wow, so it's actually quite easy and not that, well, not, it's not that hard to actually get online and start a digital type business of
Yes.
whatever type, whether it's a media, whether it's an online store." And then I read a book by David Meerman Scott called New Rules of Marketing and PR. And he talked about the ability of the social web and digital platforms to attract an audience instead of chase an audience.
Yeah.
So we're all used to outbound marketing, knocking on doors, going in newspapers and placing ads. This is what it was like years
Yes.
before. And do cold calling, right? So I'd
Correct.
been doing business development in the tech industry for a long time, and I went, I like the idea of this. In other words, can I attract an audience through content that published on the social web? So with that push by and the HubSpot blog about if you have an inkling of what you want to do in business, start a blog. So I did in 2009, and so we just started creating content.
Yep.
And so we just continued to create content for 4 years. I got up at 4:30 a.m. and wrote, and then published and promoted before I started my job at 9 a.m.
Okay.
I did that for 4 years. It was almost like it's like a force of nature, and I don't know where that came from, but I'm still curious where that came from. But I think when you tap into your passionate purpose, I think that energy shows up. But
Yeah.
so that's how it all started.
So that leads me to a few interesting questions, but I want to back a little bit more further out. So before you came onto the social, because it seems like you really got on 2009,
Yep.
and you mentioned some business development background. Did you have any other digital marketing or digital skills background? Because that'll be great for people to know, and they'll be inspired.
Zero.
Zero. So there you go, folks. Like, you can start off from zero, and this is a man who's done really, really well. And in 2008-ish, he's come online,
Yep.
and he's just exploded.
Well, it's yeah. So one of the things I discovered was one of the best ways to learn is to create,
Yes.
and by writing, by writing I learn as well. So usually, if I want to learn something, I go and write about it,
Yep.
and you learn about it, and then the act of doing,
Yes.
right? But I've been sort of in the tech industry and been in the weeds building my own businesses in the past. So, and also the other thing I'd like to say to people is that it's never too late in life to actually do what you love doing.
Oh, I
I
totally
was
subscribe
I
to
was about 51 at the time, so I'm a little bit older now, but a little
that.
bit.
Just a wee bit. We'll leave it
So
at that.
so it's never too late to start.
Yes.
So
I I'm in 100% agreement. It's never too late to start. It's You always keep learning. I subscribe to that as well. And so 2009, one of the things I can see is you said you had this passion and integrity of discipline of doing things every single day, and you were writing lots of blogs.
Yep.
Was it blogs
Yep.
that you were writing?
Yeah, I wrote 4 or 5 blogs a week. Yep.
So every one blog a day.
Yep.
And you spend those 4 hours writing that blog. So that would mean it would be a decently well researched blog. You spend some time putting it all together.
Yep.
And churning out the content. How long was it before you started discovering that you, because I'm sure the first few blogs you would not have had much traction. I'm assuming this because that's how generally I
Zero.
see. Yep. And my feeling is a lot of people see that, and 3-4 months later they say, "What am I doing?" and they just close it off. So what I want to understand from you is how long did you see the zero traffic level, and then when did the needle start moving?
Yeah, it was a very slow journey. You got to treat it as a long game. You got to
Yes.
treat it as a marathon, and also not as a destination. I think uh, I started to get. I was using Twitter as my distribution. I did have an advantage back then that social was still very organic
Yes.
before the algorithms changed from you know
Very
free
true.
to pay to play. And I rode that beast and for about 5 years. So I actually was able to tap into the organic algorithms that um, were resident within the social media platforms. But in 2013 to 14, Google changed the algorithms because they had to pay the public stakeholders, shareholders. But I suppose back to your original question, it took. I started to get 10 people. Went to my Google Analytics. I've got 10 people, and I've got 20 people, and I've got 30 people. I realised that I needed to not only create content, I needed to build distribution.
Yep.
And that's what I loved about social media, especially back then, was you could build distribution to bypass the gatekeepers.
Yes.
And they were the mass media gatekeepers, right?
Yeah.
Where the only way you could reach an audience was to go on TV, go on the radio, do an ad. And it was very localized. Whereas social media was international, it could reach the world. So the reality for me was I just had to grind away, and I worked out ways to grow my Twitter following
Yes.
until we finally got up to still today, about 560,000 Twitter followers.
Wow.
The reality is, though, that with the change in 2013-14, um, that had a significant effect on the distribution of social media and also search. But within a year or so, we were starting to get meaningful traffic. So, 500 a day, 1,000 a day, until we hit 5 million visitors a year.
Wow. So, in terms of the distribution angle
Yep.
of it, which was the Twitter and social media that you used, did you also start off at scratch? You didn't have any followers when you started in
We all
2009?
start from scratch on Twitter or any of the platforms.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So basically, for viewers and listeners out there, look at Jeff's story. Zero at the beginning on everything. So it's not as if you've come with some
I
kind of
wasn't
following.
a
You
mass
said
media personality. I didn't
exactly
have TV.
right. It's
Yeah.
hard work, lots of content
Yep.
written across and well written content,
And a lot of consistency.
consistency,
That's the key.
discipline,
Consistent and persistent.
and persistent.
Yep.
And you will see zero traffic in the beginning, but then as you keep on creating that content and make sure it's meaningful content, I guess,
Yep.
that people want. So, did you do any kind of research in terms of using tools to figure out what you should write about?
Um, Not so much. The research was done by using Google search and finding out.
Yeah.
I looked at some of the other platforms that are doing very, very well. And I basically took a bit from HubSpot. I took a bit from a few other platforms. And David Meerman Scott, he's now become a friend and colleague. But I looked at what other experts in the space were doing it, and I just took a bit of there and a bit of there. And as like Steve Jobs said, you need to steal, as in
Yes.
copy, and I mean steal in the nicest possible way. In other
Yes.
words, you take elements of other people are doing well and you weave that into your own unique.
100%, and I call that inspiration. You call, you
Yeah.
use that.
Yeah.
Do you, by any chance, remember any of the first few blogs that you would have written about?
Yeah, one of the first ones I wrote about was that Jennifer Aniston broke up with her boyfriend. I think it was Justin Timberlake at the time, um, and she said that he was tweeting too much, and so she broke up with him because. And I was tweeting a lot, and my partner at the time said to me, "Be careful about that, Jeff, because if you tweet too much, things might happen or not happen." And the reality was, I ignored her, but I still made sure she got plenty of attention. But the reality was. And that's the insight from it. I realised was that you couldn't be manually on social media if you were going to free yourself to scale.
Yes.
So I then went and started looking for tools to help me automate tweeting back in about 2010.
Nice.
And you should have seen the outcry by my followers saying, "How dare you do this on social media? Humans tweet, machines don't tweet. Social media, it's about social media and people." I went, but you can't scale yourself. So I discovered some really raw automation tools to grow my followers.
Yes.
And one of those was, if you follow people, they'll follow you
You
back.
Yes.
The law of reciprocation. So the reality for me was I needed to work out how to scale me.
Yes.
Okay, and eventually, over time, I worked out how to get guest bloggers writing for me.
Yeah.
And so I could step back and work more as a business and entrepreneur.
Two questions from there. You said the follow unfollow. I have heard of that strategy. Does it still work?
Not as well. It still does work. I think the thing in social media I think we've got to be aware of today is that with the older platforms like Facebook and Twitter, they keep reducing the algorithms to reduce organic reach.
Yeah.
In other words, they want you to pay to reach your audience that you build up.
Yes.
But there's some, excuse me, but there's some other tactics I think that you need to be aware of. I think some of the new platforms,
Yep.
because they want to get out there, they have less, I suppose, controlling algorithms that allow you to be much more organic. And
Yep.
these are the likes of Instagram Reels,
Yes.
TikTok, Snapchat,
Yep.
and now the YouTube Shorts. So if they want to grow, they've got to make it organic from the beginning.
Correct.
But I can almost guarantee over time that that algorithm will be put in place and they will force you to pay to reach your audience that you've built up.
Correct. I was at a presentation yesterday, I think, and they mentioned how Instagram has one of the highest organic rates at the moment, 7%. LinkedIn is at 2, which is there, and then Facebook at 0.37%.
Yep.
So, okay, so the follow strategy has really worked well in the past.
Yep.
It still works slightly still today.
Still
so
works,
people can
but,
still use
yeah.
that. And any particular tool to do that, or was it a manual follow unfollow?
I did it manually using Tweepy,
Yeah.
which I think is still around today. But of course, those platforms also had to comply with the rules because they were connected via APIs into
Yes.
the platforms. It is much harder today. And I think in business, if you get your timing right, it makes it a lot easier. So obviously, I got my timing right when I started. Social was very organic. The algorithms weren't really in play yet. Blogging was hot. Social media was new. So I was talking about a hot topic as well.
Yes. Blogs, you mentioned you got some guest bloggers on,
Yep.
and that freed up your time. Is blog still a highly recommended strategy to create content for your sites? And second, is it better to go just you doing one blog, or is it better to have a panelist of bloggers? Or third, I think could be just use UGC, where you can get anyone can contribute to your site and you just manage quality.
All of those.
All of those?
Yeah. So the problem if you're writing all the blogs yourself, that's not going to scale.
Yes.
And as an entrepreneur, business owner, I needed to scale myself and put in place processes that allowed me to create content at scale and then to promote it at scale. So, and that's a challenge for any business today.
Right. So, and how do you make sure quality of the bloggers who are helping you blog? How do you manage that?
So we were getting requests from bloggers. So I put in place a editor,
Yeah.
and we put in place, how many we needed a certain quality. We needed it to be unique. In other words, not published anywhere else. We needed to be around 1,000 words. And my editor, Will Blunt, who's still with me today, he manages the quality of the guest authors.
And how do you manage the Google algorithm where, I guess a lot of these guest bloggers will try to do it only because they can then link back to their website?
Yeah.
How do you manage that then?
So Google's got tougher on this. So we actually do no follow links now.
Yeah.
We used to do follow links because other bloggers, of course, are after SEO link juice.
Yes.
And that's by linking to a more higher authority site. And we're quite a high authority site. So, but we've moved to that. And I think platforms like Forbes and so on a lot of them are no follow as well these days.
Yeah.
But that's the rules and that Google's put in place. So, yeah, we've had to modify and keep evolving over time how we publish and how we manage links. Yeah.
So you have also made sure that your links are no follow, so you're
Yep. Not get hit with a manual penalty, which Google can do. The challenge for Google is that, and I saw a report the other day, is that there's complaints by a lot of restaurateurs that Google is putting up next to the website, which is listed in like the snippets at the beginning of a search result we get today, they're putting up links which go to Uber Eats, and of course they charge like 30%. So they're not driving traffic to the restaurants that are creating the content.
Yes.
They're driving traffic, and Google says, no, we're not trying to rip off the restaurants. I don't know what they're doing, but they're not serving the restaurants that are creating the content and have their own site. And that's the other problem I see with snippets as well. Google used to say we do no evil. Now they're actually they're basically stealing your content, using it for their own means or advertising, and giving you very little Google SEO traffic today.
I've seen that, and that's certainly a bone of contention. And a lot of businesses, they will face that challenge, right?
Yep.
They'll get visibility, they'll feature snippet, but then if the traffic goes somewhere else...
Well, you don't even have to click through.
Exactly.
You get the information in the snippet, no traffic goes to the website.
Whoa.
So this is the game that Google's playing, saying we're making sure it's usability. I think they have a bit bigger plan. It's about basically how can we make more money.
I totally agree. What would be your, 3, 5, 7, whatever tips that you would want to give to the audience for growing their own audience or growing their website, growing blogs, whatever it is that you would want?
Okay. So you need to focus on a niche. You need to write content that solves people's problems.
Yes.
Number 2, you then need to build your distribution.
Yep.
And then you need to test your content by measuring it and using data to work out what works and what doesn't. And I think there's some of the top tips. But how do you make money out of this? Well, then I think you've got to create a minimal viable product that tests what you've created before you leap in and create a full-blown product or service, and then evolve it from there. So I think we now today have all these amazing tools, both either low cost or free, that we can use as entrepreneurs and as content creators.
Yep.
But I think the other tip I would say is play the long game.
Play the long game, absolutely. Tools, you talked about tools. What are your favorite tools that people can use, both free and paid?
We use for our social media automation and publishing is Agora Pulse.
Agora Pulse, yes,
which
absolutely.
has been created by a very lovely French gentleman called Emeric Umut out of Paris. I've become good friends, met him at Social Media Marketing World about 10 years ago. For the business side of point, from a collaboration viewpoint, we use Trello, which is a great tool.
Project management,
One of the other tools we use, because we now launched a podcast 2 years ago, is we use Zoom to actually do the recording for podcasts.
Yes.
And what's great about Zoom is it's actually really easy to use, and that allows you to actually get separate audio files, separate video files in really good quality, automatically uploads to your computer or into the cloud. Then use a tool that links to that so I can schedule guests onto the podcast Calendly.
Yes.
So what else do we do? Google Docs is...
for collaboration and putting your sheets.
So typically we use a lot more in the cloud software.
Yes.
So there's some of the tools.
And with Agora Pulse, is that for all your social media?
Yeah.
You're putting that together?
Yeah.
Does that also do social listening, or is it more scheduling of stuff?
Look, we don't do a lot of social listening. I think social listening is good for bigger brands. They need to sift through a lot of noise.
Yeah.
I think you've got to work out what's really important, what's going to get you the right results without spending too much effort.
Camille?
I wondered if you have any advice about building a personal brand in this very crowded world of digital.
So building a personal brand is, in a very crowded world, has become tougher in the last 10, 12 years. But I think what you've got to do is you've got to be everywhere, ubiquitous. Okay, that big word, ubiquitous. In other words, be everywhere. So be on social, you've got to be found in search. You've got to create as much content as you can. I think part of personal branding is the podcast works really well for us because I can turn that into 10, 15 different pieces of content. We create a long version, full version of the podcast, and then on top of that, then we actually break that up into snippets and little topics within that my editing team does. So you've got to be relentless, you've got to be persistent, you've got to be consistent, you've got to think like a publisher. Also, what you've got to be good at too is being in the pay to play, learn how to do Facebook ads.
Yeah.
I think, you've got to realise that you can't do everything, so you've got to choose wisely which is going to get you the best results. And the only way you can do that is actually keep testing.
You mentioned you take the podcast like we are doing,
Yep.
and you break it into multiple things.
Yep.
Right? Could you give some examples of how we could take this podcast and use it for multiple things?
Okay, so when we do the podcast, we turn it into three types of media. Number one, it's audio, of course. So it's on
Yes.
Spotify. We use Libsyn to actually put it onto about 10 different audio platforms, including
Which
Google.
channel? Sorry.
Libsyn.
Lipston.
Libsyn. Libsyn.
Okay.
Okay.
Lipston.
And then that publishes to a whole range of audio channels. So there's about 10 different audio channels, including Spotify, Google, and also, of course, Apple iTunes. We also then take the video from the Zoom, and we then created a YouTube channel called Jeff Bullas Show. I couldn't think of a better name, so that's how we named it. That's personal branding
Good,
again.
exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And then what we do is the editors will then go through the 45, 50 minutes, 90 minutes, and they will actually take snippets like the 7 principles, or what are the 7 pillars, or what are the top tips,
Yep.
and they'll cut that out or take that edit and put it into a 2 to 6 minute short video.
Yes.
Then we actually then create we take a transcript. You can get technology now that takes the audio and turns it into a transcript. So I have an editor that goes through and checks it. Generally, it's pretty good. And we turn it into a blog post as well. So it becomes text, it becomes audio, it becomes video.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a great thing, because a lot of people struggle with creating content. And this is one way you can amplify
Yes.
what you're doing. Right?
Amplify your content creation.
Exactly. Amplify your content creation. That's
Repurpose
amazing.
is really important.
100%.
Yeah. My other question was, how big is your sport team? And when did you start hiring people to help building a business?
So I have contractors, freelancers. We found them on freelancer.com. We found them on Upwork. Found through personal references. So we've got a team in Hungary. We've got a team in the Philippines. We've got writers in the USA. We've got writers in New Zealand. I've got an editor in Sydney. So and what I do is we run weekly meetings using Zoom to keep in touch, and use Trello to help with the collaboration. We're now using Slack as our quick communication platform, which augments our email. Email's still used, but Slack's just recently started plugging that in, and that works well as well for more instant communication.
Yes. So a lot of good business tools really help with that whole productivity thing.
And the other thing that I would say too is not only got to fall in love with what you do, you've got to fall in love with the process of what you do. All right. And much of us as entrepreneurs, typically, we're a little bit, more creative, not so much one attention to details, more strategic, bigger picture. Reality is that if you're not good at detail, we'll hire some people to look after that detail.
So you have an OBM?
Sorry?
You currently have an online business manager for the business?
No, I manage it still,
Manage?
but I have people that look after sectors of it. So, yeah.
I had one question about the monetization that you've talked about, because I think a lot of people will benefit from that as well.
Yeah.
So at some point, YouTube would have started, contributing to your revenues, and then at some point, Google would have started giving you AdSense revenue. I'm assuming, and I'm making some assumptions, and you will correct me in terms of what it was. And how did that scale up? And can people do something similar?
Yeah, so I suppose I'm in the space of being known as an influencer in social media, digital marketing, digital entrepreneurship, and part of the podcast was do that. So we get sponsorship as an influencer, we get influencer work, we get sponsored content. We also do affiliate. In other words, as we drive traffic, we back end that into experts that have great courses and products that we recommend. So we get paid for speaking, of course, around the world. Finally, after 2 years. So yeah, that's. But then we've just created a new subscription product for premium content, which is started a new brand called sidehustlestrategies.co. which is where we provide resources and community and content and expert advice um, for those who want to either start a side hustle or grow their existing side hustle.
Oh, great. So, for the viewers out there, the main pieces of how you can monetize is you'll get AdSense revenue from Google AdSense networks, YouTube will pay you some money for advertising from there.
Yep.
Plus, you will have sponsorships directly from people who are brands who are approaching you.
Yep.
Affiliate marketing,
Yep.
so you'll be able to get some products and
Yep.
link back to them.
Yep.
Anything I missed out on?
I think try and build. I think if you're creating premium content, there's certainly a big movement into subscription newsletters these days.
Okay.
So that's our new product that we've just launched, and so I think number one, when I started, I really had no clear vision of how I was going to make money.
Yes.
So number one, discover what you want to do. That's the first thing you got to work out. Why am I here on the planet? How can I add value? And get in touch with my passionate purpose. Create something from that adds value to the world. Number three, share that with the world and see what resonates and what doesn't.
Yes.
Number four, you need then to work out, okay, so what are the different ways I can monetize this? So if I can scale it, grow it bigger, I can make a bigger difference. And number five, once you work that out and as you test it, you start with a minimal viable monetization product, is to then amplify that. And that is done through ads and partnerships with other influencers. So that's what I call the freedom code. Number one, discover why you're here on the planet. Number two, create content and products around that, services, products. Number three, share that, test it. Number four, continue to evolve how you can actually monetize that creation.
Yes.
And number five, then once you start to get traction, as you get feedback, is to actually then say, okay, let's amplify this. So that's the freedom code.
Great. Absolutely great. You mentioned email newsletters.
Yep.
How often do you do them? Because there's so much email going around in the world.
Yeah. So
Do you have a strategy for it?
yeah. So we're going to start off with every 2 weeks,
Yep.
and then once we've tested the minimal viable product, premium content, we're going to go to every weekly. But initially, we're just going to test with every fortnight.
Okay. And any email marketing tips for the audience out there?
So from day one, actually start to grow your email list.
Yep.
The challenge is a lot of people are just on platforms like, Snapchat, they're on Instagram, and they don't have a website they really look after.
Correct.
That's rented land. What you need to make sure is that you look after your owned land.
Absolutely.
That's your email list. That's your website. Because they're not trapped by algorithms. Well, email is trapped by algorithms because Google now has actually put in place algorithms to send even their own emails to you to spam. So even Google can't work out its own algorithms,
Yes.
as we know. I didn't get it. Check your spam, and it's from Google.
Yeah. So you're saying that in terms of email marketing,
Yep.
you would do
I'd offer
grow
premium,
your
grow your
your
list from
list.
day one.
Okay. And you can't do that if you're just on Facebook, etc.
No, it's
You
free.
would need to have your own land
Yeah.
on which you can
Build your assets and
build
content.
your assets.
Yeah.
So that's your number one tip. Make sure you have a website or a landing page at the very least
Yep.
where they can
You can have a one-pager.
one
It'd be very
pager.
simple.
Yep.
And offer premium content that people is so attractive that people can't say no to actually downloading it.
So that they
Ebook,
give you
yep.
so that they give you their name
That's right.
for that email ID.
Yep.
And would you have multiple fields, or you would begin just by getting just that email ID, and is that good enough?
Keep it simple initially. If you really want to target a segment, you really want to be able to use that list in a very targeted way. Yes, you can segment, but the more fields you add, the harder it is to actually capture you're going to cut your conversion rate.
So just make sure you get that email ID would be
And their first name.
and their first name.
That would be the minimum.
Yeah, because you want to get the open rates up by putting that in
You
there.
want to personalize
subject
your email.
line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so that be another tip with the email marketing. Make sure you put that have a strong subject line.
Yep.
And
Yeah, and I'm seeing likes of actually subject lines having 2 or 3 almost subjects. I'm seeing it done at Hustle. I'm seeing it done at Trends.co. They'll actually have 3 different headlines in the subject line. Interesting, but then it touches 3 audiences.
right. And any particular tools you like for your email marketing?
We're using Infusionsoft at the moment,
Yeah.
but its nickname is Confusionsoft. And I've been using it for years, but we are moving to another platform which we're testing at the moment. So, um, I think Infusionsoft was great for a long time, but I think it's got some issues with the opening rates. I think it's been used a lot of spam over years. And also, I don't think they've really invested in the platform for quite a long time,
And
seriously.
what about some of the other commonly used platforms like Mailchimp, Constant Contact?
Yeah.
Are
Active
they as
campaign.
well?
Yeah, they're all good. I think Mailchimp's a good starter.
Yeah.
Quite easy to use. I have used that in the past. Um, but yeah, we're testing one at the moment, which we're going to find if it works or not.
All right, man. Thank you so much. It's been fantastic having you on the platform, on the podcast. We will try to do what you've said, try to segment it, break it down into pieces, feed it to the audience, do all of that.
You need editors for that.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
All right, pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you.
Nice.
Richie. Okay.
And looking forward to see you on the stage.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, it's coming up shortly.
yeah. Got time.